in so many different aspects of life, like not just in regards to plants, Um, but yeah, how you describe yourself is really potent for yourself and for others around you.
I think this is a good segue into something that I've also seen you be a little bit more vocal about with your meditation episode recently. How is that growth period from realizing that you have this emotional connection to plants and they're teaching you as you're caring for them? How has that led into a more deeper meditation practice?
Oh, I love this question too. So I have been a meditator since I was in my teens. It was actually a technique that I learned to deal with anxiety back then. And I have had kind of a love-hate with meditation my entire life because it's hard. It's hard and annoying to sit still in a, rigid. I used to do Zen meditation, which is like a very rigid, you're supposed to sit in a certain way. And I remember going to this monastery retreat and like they would like hit you with these rods to like keep you in the moment. Like it was very rigid and austere and intense. And thankful for the lessons that I learned in that chapter of my life. But meditation can be really hard to stick with, and it can be really intimidating for people, and a lot of people I hear say, yeah, I'd love to meditate, but like I just can't sit still, I can't get it. And what I noticed with plants is that basically plants are an opportunity for moving meditation. So the biggest aha moment that I had was when I started caring. So I had a 9 square foot balcony garden in my apartment in New York City. I had like and I filled it. I mean, it was insane. I filled it with as many plants as possible. There was no seating space. I would open the door and I would sit in the door jamb like to be with my plants. But also you're in New York City, so you just take any outdoor space that you can.
Right.
And I noticed that when I used to wake up and have my coffee in the morning, I'd have it with my phone and Instagram. And I noticed all of a sudden, and then I would have to like disconnect from my phone to meditate. And I'd be like, okay, this is my meditation time, set my meditation timer, do this, blah, blah, blah. And usually I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't want to do that. I want to just stay on my phone. When I started having my coffee with my plants in the morning, I left my phone and I essentially meditated. I cleared my thoughts. I looked at the leaves. I would watch dew drop off of leaves. Like I was having a meditative experience just without the like the rigidity of a quote unquote meditation practice. And I think that was my first kind of aha moment of, oh wow, these are wellness tools. Like plants are wellness tools. They're not just decor. They're not just a means of growing your own food. Like this is going to be one of the most important tools in my toolkit to deal with, my mental health struggles. And then, the last couple of years have been this beautiful unfolding. I've also since left the city and I've moved to the woods. So I moved from 500 square feet in New York City to 5 acres in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I live in the sticks in the countryside now, and
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by nature. And what I find is, the more I'm in nature, the more I'm with plants, whether it's my house plants or my garden or just the trees on my property, the more I'm able to regulate my nervous system, the calmer I am, the happier I am, the less anxious I feel. And then therefore that makes me want to go spend more time with my plants because I feel good. So I feel like plants have been kind of, I heard someone refer to it as an ambulatory meditation practice, like when you're moving around, but plants are an opportunity for moving meditation. And it's a lot easier to spend 10 minutes watering your entire plant collection in quiet, in solitude, than it is to sit on a couch with your legs crossed and a meditation timer going for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's an easy way to lean back in. Um, and if you are going to meditate, you should meditate around your plants because it's going to be easier to do. If you are going to have that rigid meditation practice, which I still have,
Right.
but I make sure that my eyes are open and I'm looking at the leaf silhouettes of my plants in my window, because I just feel like you get that nervous system benefit.
Yeah. And this might be too woo woo, but I believe that we're also source energy and these plants are alive and
100%.
radiating energy. So just having that time to just, you say, look at a plant before you look at a
Yeah.
screen.
Look at a
I think
plant before you
that's,
look at a screen.
yeah,
And you're funny because in our DMs, you've totally called me out on my woo-woo witchy era that I'm moving into. But I will also say, the more I found that I've connected with plants and nature, the more I was raised very strictly Catholic, which I don't identify as in any shape or form. Um, but I'm immensely spiritual. And the more I connect with plants and the more I connect with nature, the more spiritual I feel like way more connected to the moon and the moon
Yeah.
cycles and like Gaia, like Mother Nature, Gaia energy. And it's a direct effect of my relationship with houseplants and my garden, but like on a larger scale. And I do feel like I see that with a lot of people in the plant space is houseplants end up being a not gateway drug isn't the right word, but like a gateway for understanding this larger source, life, Gaia experience that we're all a part of, that we all forget that, we are not the main character of the Earth's story, right? Like we are such a supporting character in Mother Nature's story. She'll be around much longer than we will, and she's been around much longer. So I don't know. I do find that fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I mean, coming from the era of like The Secret, and I would
Mm-hmm.
go
Me too.
20 years ago, I mean, I was obsessed with it. But
Me
I
too. That's
also
funny.
need, but it also works. Like
100%.
I manifested this amazing fashion career doing hair for the Met
Oh,
Gala and
right.
Vogue,
Insane.
it's just insane. I didn't have the, and even though I was living it in New York, I was so hard on myself and I didn't really understand the gifts that I really had
Mm,
until like I came to Florida and it was the plants. And then I was like, oh, this is what life's about. Like,
hmm
it's not about trying, not that I was cutthroat, but it's just being, an actress in New York that you have to hustle, 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 hustle.
Yes.
And with the plants, it was just like, oh, I can breathe.
And I think, can I share another story that's very related to that?
Yeah.
Um, I think too with that hustle mentality. Well, once again, now to get too deeply woo, if you look at the chakras, I feel like living in New York City, it's like, I don't know, it's your top four chakras, and you get kind of disconnected from your root and your sacral. And I think earth energy really grounds you in a way that you can't really find without it. And I think when you're in the city and you're surrounded by concrete, that's like very hard to kind of, for lack of a better word, root into. But also when you were talking about hustle, I mean, one of my biggest aha moments that I ever had with plants is I was having my look at a plant before you look at a screen moment. I had auditioned for a Broadway show and I didn't get it. And the girl, when you're an actress, you end up being in final callbacks with the same four people over and over again because you all kind of look the same, like you're the same type of talent. So you kind of get to know your competition and then you're friends with them. And it's this like very weird dynamic. So anyway, I didn't book a show. I knew the girl that booked the show. And then this other person I knew had just booked a Broadway show. And I just felt like I was falling so behind. Like I was just in a state. I was in a state. And I was looking at this herb garden that I grew, and it was in one pot, chives, sage, basil. I think there was thyme and something else. And I was looking at them and I was just like, wow, these plants are all growing in this one container and they're growing completely differently and they shine throughout different parts of the season and they all have their own different personalities and growth habits and none of them give a shit about each other. Like my basil is not trying to grow like my chive. Like my basil is growing the way my basil is and my chive is growing the way my chive is. And I don't know, in that moment it really struck home with me where I think in my book I said like we're all in this pot of humanity together, growing
Yeah.
exactly how we're supposed to be growing. And just because someone else quote unquote blooms doesn't mean that you're not going to bloom. It just means it's going to take you a little your growth experience is just going to look a little different. And that's where I really feel like the magic is in plants is that, if you allow yourself, you can really see your life reflected back at you through them. I say if you've got a problem, therapy is amazing. Everyone should be in therapy, but if you've got a problem, you can likely solve it in your garden if you open yourself up to it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you say that about the podcast, through the lens of plants, and it's so true. Like the metaphor of our lives through plants.
Mhm.
I talked about that like in the first episode of how I got involved, and how I became obsessed with plants. And it really was a time where I needed them more than they needed me. And
100%. Can I share too, if with your permission, I don't wanna overstep, but I've been meditating and thinking about this plant life metaphor around death. Can I
yeah,
share that with you just now
yeah,
knowing your
love that.
story?
Yeah,
Because a couple years ago, through the series of wild and unfortunate events, ended up not being able to plant this whole garden that I had planned, and I had made friends with this woman, Melody. She was like 75 years old, 80 years old, epic lifelong gardener. And we ended up gardening together. I ended up basically being like her garden apprentice. I would go a couple of times a month and sorry, I would go a couple of times a week. We started all of our seeds together and planted out. She had like an acre and a half garden plot. And she was like my best friend. She came to my wedding. I would cry to her in the greenhouse. It was a really tough personal moment in my life as well. And she sadly, in the middle of our time gardening together, she had cancer that came back and sadly passed a couple months after my wedding. And I was just trying to like make sense of it all and think about it. And the other day I was walking through our property because right now we're at the just beginning of spring where the trees haven't leafed out yet, which I love because you can see a lot of stuff in the forest that you can't normally see when the leaves are on the trees. And I was looking at these trees that have fallen in the forest and seeing how they decompose and how they become homes for, animals in the forest. But really, when these trees die in the forest, they decompose and they become the nitrogen and the fertilizer that then fertilizes the rest of the forest, right? Like fertilizes